in terms of the re-emerging enablers, what we're really talking about is those particular trends and activities that particularly we're seeing in WA are those that CIOs and IT divisions are actually investing in still. They've been considered in the past, probably from a maturity perspective haven't actually been quite there yet, but are now starting to re-emerge as real players. And in terms of the disruptive deployments, again, I'm not actually talking about disruptive technology here, because when you look at that list, none of those are actually disruptive. They've all made their disruption. Now they're actually quite mature. So it's actually about the deployment itself. Now, what we mean by that is by deploying some of those technologies, you're disrupting the way your business does its operations or its processes, and by doing so, it's changing the cost structure of your operations as well. So it's not necessarily radically changing the way business is done. There's an incremental value in there that we believe that these disruptive deployments will take place. Now, the ones that I'll probably go into a little bit are real analytics, social computing, and applied mobility. And there's a really good sort of convergence across those three now that we're seeing, particularly in WA, that we can harness. So what I might do is now just go into the re-emerging trends and quickly talk about visualisation. So Paul talked about visualisation in his definition very quickly. So I won't repeat what's up there, but let me give you an example of perhaps what it means to me for visualisation, and I'll give you an analogy about my son who's 5, and currently he's not the most well-behaved child at school, and the teachers now deployed a strategy whereby instead of sending mum and dad a note with check boxes and ticks and a slip of some sort, which has information on it and it's categorised and structured in a particular way, she's asking my child, who cannot read and write, to draw a picture of whatever the event or incident was that was inappropriate, that's got him into a bit of discipline. So we're now receiving pictures from the teacher that my son has drawn that explain exactly what it is he's done. Now, he cannot read and write, but these pictures are conveying very rich information. And again, it comes back down to us as human beings and how we interpret information and data. And visualisation is one of the trends now that we're seeing that has a real impact on how we're actually generating different insights by making different connections. Now, if you think back, millions of years ago, where pens and papers weren't invented, but certainly rocks and sticks and cave walls were, that was conveying information, very important information. So nothing's changed. We're all human. We're very visual beings. And again, this presentation is an example of that. Right now, I'm conveying auditory information to you. You're processing it at a certain rate. You're not absorbing all of it, every word I'm saying. You're looking at a picture, you're hearing noise, you're looking at processing all this information at once. So what we're saying is visualisation is really going to have an impact on our own productivity. And the survey results suggest that, particularly in the research, 97% of the participants and our clients actually truly believe that it will have a high impact on their productivity and being able to interpret results better, have more meaning in terms of the information that's being presented, and understand those connections in a different way. Now, let me just give you some other stats on this. So, in terms of unstructured data, the growth of that is doubling every 18 months in terms of what we're seeing in data centres. And as a result of that, you're starting to get this explosion of information that's available. Now, when you combine the ability now of processing power that can visualise data in different ways, and I'll shortly show you some examples of what that might look like, we're starting to generate different insights and more meaningful insights into that. Now, if we take that extreme example, the most extreme example we can uncover and give an example of is NASA's Hyperwall. It's the highest resolution visualisation environment on the planet. And what it consists of is 1,024 CPU processors. It's about the power of 600 Xboxes. Now, if you can think of the power of an Xbox, and it's already quite enormous ability to process graphics and render pixels on a screen, you multiply that by 600 times. NASA are using an 8x16 panel display to actually visually encapture many different data sets that they use through their research and development trials, and looking at better ways to now understand what's going on in terms of some of their rocket science and componentry and tests and aspects like that. So that's one of the extreme examples that we can look at. So if I just give you an example, what I plan to do here was actually jump onto the web live and show you a demo of Gapminder. Gapminder is an organisation that's been recently acquired by Google, and what it does is it actually visualises data, many data points, but it plots it over time and it animates it. Now, unfortunately, the internet connection here is quite slow, so what I'm going to do is just quickly switch on another example in the health arena that we can look at in terms of how data has been visualised a certain way and what sort of different insights have been generated as a result of that. So just bear with me, I'll just quickly switch modes and go into PowerPoint and just quickly show you what's going on here. Now this is an example of how data might be visualised. What you're seeing up there is on the vertical axis number of patients receiving a particular treatment, and on the horizontal axis each individual type of drug that's being administered to these patients. Now it kind of looks like DNA sequencing, doesn't it? But what this is actually telling us is if you look at it that way and you pick up a thread of a patient, it shows that patient 2500 is being administered drug number 3, drug number 8, drug number 10, 12 and so on and so on. Now it kind of in that sense doesn't tell you a lot of information. It sort of maps a whole bit of data sets, and you're already probably thinking, well, that could easily be charted and plotted in a different way, and it's not that spectacular. But the technique about visualisation now is also around how we might want to cluster that information. So when you look at what we've just done here, it's the same information just grouped in a slightly different way. And visually, you're already now starting to see and process this information in a different way. Would anyone like to guess what is now occurring, what this chart actually tells us? It's the same data set, just slightly grouped and clustered in a different way. So we have some drugs being administered on the vertical. We have a patient on a horizontal. What's that telling us? Anyone hazard a guess? No?
Clusters of drug use. In terms of the actual patients, some patients they group it together with some patients that atrophy or whatever it is a large group of them, and presumably there's some sort of ordering.
Yeah. Age, patient age, or
not age, but
some other characteristic.
Have a look at that.
The condition that they're suffering, or
and I'll come to that in a moment. Look at that blank space there. So, did you have a?
Well, I assume it's about looking at the combination people take. You can easily now see the way it's sorted and clustered down. A couple of patients quite seem to take the same mix of medication.
Yeah. So you've all heard of the AIDS cocktail, right? It's if someone's suffering HIV, there's a cluster of drugs that those patients actually are administered quite often. This is actually a representative sample of that. Now what it's telling us is there's some cocktail occurring here. There's a group of patients in this category that are using and being prescribed these particular cocktail of drugs. But the anomaly is actually this one here, where there is no other drugs being administered other than this particular drug. And over here there's more cocktails and so forth. So what you see there is there's a combination of patients on that one, patients just typically on one drug alone, and a combination of patients on a multitude of different drugs and so forth. Now, from a healthcare perspective and from an e-health perspective, particularly in WA that's on a trend going forward in this space, it's pretty important to see what sort of behaviour is occurring in terms of those patient outcomes. Now, obviously, each of these patients are being treated by a different physician. So the theory here was that there were 3 particular influential physicians administering these drugs to this patient data. Now, when we plot that visually, The red dots actually represent the theory behind those three administering physicians. Now, what the data actually tells us now is it sort of busts that myth that those three doctors were quite influential, because clearly there are other concentrations of physicians that have stronger networks within the hospital administration system that are much strongly connected than that one. There's some strong connection there, there's a cluster there, there's some loose affiliation over here, but look at the strength down here. So there's something else going on there in terms of the pattern of administration of drugs, in terms of this cocktail and the patient care, versus where the power base actually lies. So through the use of visualisation, data can tell us many things. Now I'll quickly switch back. And before I move on, I just wanted to quickly show you another example of data visualisation. So this is a depiction of a social network via Twitter in terms of where the connections are being made. Now, it looks like spaghetti, but again, if we go back to us being human beings and how we interpret data and visuals, what you're doing right now is picking up patterns of size and colours of the circles and the lines joining circles, and you're seeing trends. So there's Deloitte in the middle there. Here are a number of all the vendor connectivity. Here's the media that sits right in the middle of the vendor connectivity and Deloitte and other competitors, right? So who would have thought that before, right? So if we look at Twitter and we look at the communication that is occurring, there's connections between vendors, into market, out of market, and there seems to be almost an intermediary of these connections between integrators and the vendors. And it's a very different way of looking at the information. So these are just some examples of how we might visualise the data.